on roughly $21 billion of U.S. products, from computers to water heaters. The EU, meanwhile, targeting $28 billion in U.S. goods, including beef, poultry, and eggs.
Today, I would like to focus on the threats to global prosperity and stability, thus our competitiveness, and the rise of protectionism.
Wary markets rebound as Europe and Canada retaliate against Trump tariffs. Canada joins the EU in U.S. steel tariffs retaliation with a $20 billion plan. $2 trillion US, yes, you didn't mishear. That's the projected amount preparing to evaporate from America's pockets amid the escalating protectionist tariff policies of Trump. The EU has just responded forcefully to this tariff policy by redirecting capital flows, supply chains, and massive billion-dollar contracts to Canada and new agreements in Asia. If the plan succeeds, the U.S. economy will witness a historic loss of $2,000 billion US, a direct punch to the heart of the transatlantic alliance. Trump once said the EU had been sponging off the U.S. for many years, while Brussels now proves they can live well, even thrive, without Washington. So, is this the end of a 70-year alliance or just a preemptive strike to force the White House to lower tariffs? And if Mr. Trump miscalculates, who will be the one to lose everything in the biggest economic chess game of the century? Let's find out in today's video, and don't forget to click subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss any of the latest updates from Deep State. Amid escalating trade tensions between the US and the European Union, the EU's threat to cancel a $43.2 billion aircraft order from Boeing is not merely a trade move, but also reflects strong resistance to the Trump administration's unilateral tariff policies. Since 2018, the Trump administration has imposed a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum imported from the EU, citing national security concerns. By 2025, these measures were reinstated and expanded, applying an additional 25% tariff on cars and parts from Europe, along with a basic 10% tariff on most imported goods. The EU has repeatedly proposed a zero-for-zero agreement to eliminate bilateral tariffs, but the US has not responded positively. Europe's key export industries such as automobiles, machinery, and wine have suffered heavily. In response, the EU has imposed a 25% tariff on $23 billion worth of US goods, including corn, wheat, motorcycles, and clothing. Additionally, the EU is preparing a $114 billion tariff package targeting Boeing aircraft and U.S. cars if trade negotiations fail. The EU's consideration of canceling Boeing aircraft orders and shifting to Airbus or even China's COMAC is a clear signal of lost trust in the U.S. Ryanair has warned it will cancel an order for 330 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, worth $30 billion if costs increase due to tariffs. CEO Michael O'Leary stated he would consider purchasing aircraft from COMAC if prices are reasonable. Not only the aviation industry but other U.S. companies are also facing a wave of boycotts in Europe. Tesla, under Elon Musk's leadership, has seen sales in Germany drop nearly 60% due to associations with far-right politics. In Sweden, Tesla's sales have decreased by 81% compared to the same period last year. These trade tensions have negatively impacted the U.S. economy. In the first quarter of 2025, the U.S. GDP fell by 0.3%, marking the first decline since 2022. The main reason is that businesses imported goods en masse to avoid new tariffs, causing imports to surge by 41.3%, and the trade deficit to reach a record $140.5 billion. The U.S. Federal Reserve warns that unstable tariff policies could lead to higher inflation, slower growth, and job losses. In summary, the EU's threat to cancel Boeing aircraft orders is part of a broader reaction to U.S. trade policies. Without a change in approach, the U.S. may face more severe economic consequences in the future, as the EU and the U.S. have been close allies for decades. As trade tensions between the U.S. and the European Union peak, the EU has implemented a series of retaliatory measures to protect its economic interests and send a strong message to Washington. In this video, I will detail the retaliatory actions the EU is taking and plans to take against its economic adversary. In April 2025, the EU imposed tariffs worth €2 billion, approximately $23 billion on U.S. goods including steel, aluminum, motorcycles, and clothing. This was in response to the U.S. imposing a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imported from the EU. Simultaneously, the EU is preparing an additional €100 billion, or $113 billion, tariff package directly targeting key U.S. export industries such as aviation, technology, and agriculture if current trade negotiations continue to stall. Beyond tariff measures, the EU has utilized the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution mechanisms to challenge U.S. actions. The EU immediately initiated legal proceedings at the WTO, accusing the U.S. of violating Article 21 of the GATT agreement, which only allows trade restrictions for national security reasons in truly necessary cases. According to the EU's argument, imposing tariffs on traditional allies like Europe, who pose no threat to U.S. security, is an abuse of authority and contrary to the spirit of free trade. In June 2018, the EU officially requested consultations with Washington with the case recorded as DS 548 at the WTO. This was not merely a formal move but the opening salvo in a prolonged legal campaign. By 2022, the WTO ruled in favor of the EU, stating that the US could not use national security as a pretext to impose protectionist tariffs. This provided Europe with a solid legal basis to implement retaliatory trade measures on U.S. goods if the U.S. failed to comply with the ruling. Additionally, to support businesses affected by U.S. tariffs, some EU member states have implemented support funds. For instance, Spain announced a 14.1 billion or 15.66 billion support package to help industries like automotive and olive oil cope with the impact of U.S. tariffs. The EU's retaliatory measures have put pressure on the U.S. economy. Not only large companies like Boeing or Tesla are affected. When a tariff war erupts, American citizens are truly at the forefront. U.S. goods face higher tariffs in the European market, leading to declining sales, reduced production, and job cuts. The agricultural sector, which relies on exports, has seen sharp declines in commodity prices while fertilizer and raw material costs have risen due to disrupted supply chains. In the Midwest states, where soybean and corn exports to the EU were once a lifeline, there has been a wave of bankruptcies among small farms. Moreover, U.S.-imposed import tariffs on European goods have also hit Americans' wallets. When European components for cars, electronics, or even industrial machinery are taxed higher, the final product prices also increase. In other words, American consumers are paying the price for trade conflicts they did not initiate. According to the latest data from Eurostat, in 2024, the EU exported 531.6 billion euros worth of goods to the US, while the US exported only 333.4 billion euros to the EU, creating a trade surplus of 198.2 billion euros for Europe. The EU's targeting of hundreds of billions of dollars in US goods is not only a tit-for-tat move, but also a way to leverage the asymmetric trade balance to increase pressure. Clearly, in a world where global trade is becoming a new geopolitical battlefield, no one is truly on the sidelines. Every tariff, every WTO ruling sends ripples far and wide, and American citizens, from factory workers to supermarket shoppers, are feeling those ripples acutely. Not only responding with tariffs, the EU has also taken covert steps by expanding cooperation with various international trade partners to avoid dependence on the US market. One notable move is the EU's strengthening of cooperation with Canada through the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CEDA, aiming to reduce reliance on the US and bolster its global economic position. CEDA, signed in 2016 and provisionally effective from September 2017, is a comprehensive free trade agreement between the EU and Canada. This agreement eliminated 98% of tariffs between the two parties upon implementation and is expected to remove nearly all remaining tariff barriers by 2024. This has facilitated freer movement of goods and services between the EU and Canada, boosting bilateral investment and expanding markets for businesses on both sides. One of the sectors benefiting significantly from CEDA is high technology and renewable energy. The EU and Canada have established cooperation mechanisms in developing clean technology, including organizing the CEDA Clean Technology Summit in 2022 to promote trade, investment, and collaboration in this field. Additionally, the two sides are closely cooperating in building sustainable and diversified supply chains, especially as the world faces challenges related to climate change and energy security. Defense cooperation is also an area of interest for the EU and Canada. The two sides have enhanced dialogue and coordination on regional and global security issues, including maintaining stability in the Indo-Pacific region. This cooperation not only helps strengthen security for both parties, but also plays an important role in maintaining an international rules-based order. However, CEDA also faces internal challenges within the EU. Some member states, such as France, have expressed concerns about the agreement's impact on agriculture and the environment. In March 2024, the French Senate voted against ratifying CEDA, citing the need to protect farmers and national food sovereignty. Nevertheless, the agreement continues to be provisionally applied and continues to bring economic benefits to both the EU and Canada. The EU's strengthening of cooperation with Canada through CEDA demonstrates a clear strategy to diversify economic partners and reduce dependence on the U.S. Amid the U.S.'s imposition of unilateral tariff measures and a trend toward trade protectionism, the EU is seeking other reliable partners to ensure long-term economic stability and development. This shift not only affects large companies like Boeing but also has far-reaching impacts on the U.S. economy, especially as its GDP shows signs of decline. In summary, CEDA is not just a trade agreement between the EU and Canada, but also part of the EU's broader strategy to strengthen its global economic and political position amid rapidly changing geopolitics. In addition to Canada, the EU is proactively expanding markets and promoting green diplomacy to reduce dependence on the U.S. and strengthen its global economic position. One of the EU's strategic moves is to enhance cooperation with new economic partners through negotiating and signing free trade agreements. The EU is actively promoting relations with countries in the Indo-Pacific region, including restarting free trade agreement negotiations with Malaysia and strengthening partnerships with Vietnam through the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which has been effective since 2020. Additionally, the European Union is expanding cooperation with African and Middle Eastern countries such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, aiming to diversify energy and raw material supplies. Alongside market expansion, the EU is intensifying exports of clean technologies and renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, and hydrogen. Through the Repower EU plan, the EU aims to produce and import 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2030 to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and promote green energy transitions. Countries like Spain and Germany are heavily investing in green hydrogen production, while joint projects with Egypt and Morocco are being implemented to import renewable energy into Europe. The European Commission report details $45 billion for clean energy and $800 million for hydrogen by 2030. Notably, the EU is considering bilateral negotiations with countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Saudi Arabia to promote cooperation in renewable energy and clean technology. These agreements not only help the EU secure sustainable energy supplies but also open up economic cooperation opportunities with developing nations, contributing to global economic growth. The total value of contracts and cooperation agreements in renewable energy and clean technology pursued by the EU could reach trillions of dollars over the next decade, reflecting the EU's strong commitment to building a green and sustainable economy. These moves by the EU are not only aimed at mitigating the effects of U.S. tariff measures, but also demonstrate a long-term strategy to reshape the global economic order with a focus on sustainable development and multilateral cooperation. Alongside that, the EU's threat to cancel a $43.2 billion aircraft order from Boeing is not merely a trade reaction but reflects a broader strategy restructuring its defense and security relations after Brexit. This event marks a turning point in how the EU reshapes its defense strategy and opens up new opportunities and challenges in the relationship with the United Kingdom, a non-member partner that still plays an important role in European security. After the UK left the EU, the bloc lost one of its strongest military powers. This has forced the EU to strengthen internal defense cooperation and seek new partners to ensure regional security. One of the key initiatives is the Permanent Structured Cooperation, known as PESCO, established in 2017. It's aimed at promoting closer coordination among member states in the field of defense. PESCO allows EU countries to jointly develop military capabilities, share technology, and implement joint projects, thereby enhancing the bloc's overall defense capacity. In addition, the European Defence Fund, or EDF, was established to provide financial support for research and development projects in defense. EDF aims to boost cooperation between defense companies within the EU, reduce dependence on external suppliers, and increase Europe's strategic autonomy. However, the UK's departure from the EU has left a significant gap in the bloc's defense sector. The UK is one of Europe's biggest defense spenders and home to many leading defense companies. The absence of the UK from initiatives like PESCO and EDF raises questions about future defense cooperation between the EU and the UK. Although no longer an EU member, the UK still plays a vital role in European security. Both sides acknowledge the importance of maintaining a close defense relationship. Recently, there have been positive signs of renewed defense cooperation between the EU and the UK. For example, in May 2025, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer was invited to attend the EU Leaders Summit, marking progress in post-Brexit relations. However, establishing an official defense relationship between the EU and the UK is not easy. Issues such as access to EU defense funds, intelligence sharing, and cooperation in joint defense projects remain under negotiation. Additionally, legal and political barriers may hinder this process. Meanwhile, the EU is also expanding defense cooperation with other non-member partners. Canada, for instance, has joined PESCO's military mobility project, aimed at simplifying and standardizing cross-border military transport procedures within the EU. Canada's participation shows that the EU is willing to work with external partners to strengthen regional security. In summary, the EU's threat to cancel the aircraft order from Boeing is not only a reaction to U.S. tariff measures but also reflects a broader strategy to restructure defense and security relations after Brexit. This event opens up opportunities for the EU to boost internal cooperation, seek new partners, and redefine its role in global security. At the same time, it poses challenges in maintaining a strong defense relationship with the UK, an important partner that is now outside the bloc. Clearly, the EU's tough moves, from threatening to cancel Boeing's multi-billion-dollar orders, retaliating with tariffs, expanding trade ties with Asia-Pacific, to restructuring its post-Brexit defense strategy, show that Brussels no longer wants to play the role of Washington's passive ally. Instead, the EU is gradually building a multipolar economic and defense network where it can define the rules, secure its own safety, and expand its global influence without relying too heavily on the United States. But the question now is, can the EU maintain this momentum in the long run when it still needs to balance the massive economic benefits of the transatlantic relationship with the internal need for political stability, especially in the face of rising populist forces, energy crisis, and mounting pressure from China? If you found this topic interesting and want to follow the latest developments in global politics and military affairs, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any new videos from Deep State.